All right, guys, time to go to school. See you guys in a few minutes. Well, here I am at school. Hey guys, so the last worksheet that I gave you guys to do was figuring out these pedigrees, but having you figure them out backwards. I finally got myself a whiteboard, and I'm able to teach you the way that I like to teach you. You guys know I like to teach you this way. So I kind of want to go over the pedigree thing just a little bit. I know you guys have been getting it from the videos that I've sent you and you've been working on, but I'm going to go over some things on my own. One day next week, I'm going to give you guys a test on all this stuff. So let's make sure that we're good. The other thing I want to point out is I did have some students do one-on-one Zoom extra help with me, and it really helped them out. So if you guys are interested in doing that, I can do that as well. Okay, so we're talking about these pedigrees, right? A square always equals the man, right? And a circle always equals the woman, right? Okay, and let's get some other terms out of the way so that we know what we're talking about, right? When we say that someone is the person that we're looking at that has that particular trait, we fill that block in, right? So a lot of times it'll say like the afflicted person if we're talking about a disease, but even if we're talking about like, you know, some other trait, right? Somebody's filled in, that means they have that trait. The other thing is you'll see a lot of times, and usually it's only with the females, but you'll see just a dot in the middle, and that means that that person is a carrier, right? So a carrier would be like some of the problems that you guys did. If this woman, right, she is a carrier for that recessive hemophiliac allele, right? She's a carrier, so we would make that the symbol for a carrier with that. Okay. All right. So some of the problems that I gave you, I'm going to go over some of those. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. There's one other thing I want to go over. All right. So we have these two different things, right? And I know you guys have seen these words, autosomal, right? Autosomal just means it's any of the cells of your body, right? Or any of the traits of your body that aren't sex-linked, right? So if it's sex-linked or X-linked really is the better term, X-linked, it'll say X-linked, right? If it says autosomal, then it's not X-linked, right? It's things like hair color, eye color, stuff like that. All right? So that's some of the things that we have to get out of the way before we get started. All right, stop. All right, guys, when I first look at this, these diagrams, I want to make sure that I know what I'm looking at here, right? So I'm looking at a father and a mother who had two children, right? A girl and a boy, right? We have a father and a mother who had two children, a boy and a girl. Well, this girl and this boy had 4 kids together, right? That's what we're looking at. This other girl marries this man, has this girl who marries this man who has this girl, right? And same thing here, this boy marries that girl. They have this boy who marries that girl who has this boy. This boy marries that girl and has a child. I know when you kind of look at it, right? They're sort of like cousins, but whatever. It just helps us to make this pedigree chart, right? Anyway, we need to figure out, is this autosomal recessive? Is it autosomal dominant? Is it sex-linked, right? We're not sure, right? So when I look at a diagram like this, and there's only a few people that are afflicted, my assumption is one of two things. It's either recessive or it's sex-linked, right? Now, when it's sex-linked, usually if there's like only boys that are afflicted, then you would think it might be sex-linked. However, we have 2 girls that are affected and we have 1 boy, right? I'm going to start out with this, looking at it as being autosomal recessive. I may get halfway through this and find out that that doesn't work, but as long as I can keep going and making it work, then it is what it is. If it doesn't work, then I got to change it and try again. All right, so making this autosomal recessive, I'm going to use little a for this guy, right? So the only way that they would be able to get the recessive and the recessive means that they would have gotten each one of these, one from each parent, right? But each parent doesn't have the this trait, whatever it is. So that means that each parent has to be heterozygous, right? So we make each parent heterozygous. That allows us to get the small a from each parent. So then that means we can transfer that exact same thing here to those two, knowing that both of these parents also have to be heterozygous for that to happen, right? And then these two boys, we're not really sure, right? They could have gotten both dominants. They could have gotten a dominant and a recessive, but either way, they don't have this trait, right? Okay, but really what we're focused on are the ones that have the trait. Does it continue to work, right? Okay, well, this could be that could be that, right? That works, right? We've got the small a from there, big A from there, that works, right? We got the small a from there, big A from there, that works, right? Does it work for everybody? Okay, well, if we go like this, it looks to me like, right, we can keep tracing back this recessive trait all the way. Now, what we can't do is, right, none of these that are come from this family line that we're looking at, right, these people are the people that married in, right, they're not going to have this recessive trait, right? It might come from them, but, you know, usually when you do these, you want to figure it out and see that it's something that is coming through the family, right? So now we can follow it all the way through, and we know that the answer for this one is autosomal recessive. And that's what you should have gotten for answer number 1. Thank you. All right, guys, here's the second one, right? So I'm going to take a look at this, right? And I'm going to say to myself, all right, let me just try it out and say that this person is has both recessive traits, right? So we'll say this is recessive, right? And this person we'll say is dominant recessive, okay? Let's see if this works out. Okay, so we can have big A, little a for here, that works, right? Small a from here, small a from there, that works, right? Small a, that works, right? So then that would mean, right, that this person, to have this affliction, would have to be small a, but if we do that, well, now that doesn't account for these guys here, right? So it can't be recessive, right? Autosomal recessive. So we got to go back, right? So sometimes, like I said, you start these out and they don't work out the way that you think that they're going to work out, right? So let's go back. All right, so now let's say that that is a dominant trait, right? So we're just going to put the one dominant there, right? Here, though, it's going to have to be recessive, right? It has to be for this person to have that, to not have this thing if it's dominant, right? So for this child to not have it, that would mean that that person, that woman, has to be heterozygous, right? So we got both small a's from there, right? We got this here, that works, right? Then we got this here, that works. All right, good. So we're good, right, so far. Now, before we try to figure out these people, right, let's look at their offspring, right? So for these children to all have the recessive, right, so they're all going to have to be this, right? Meaning that this person is going to have to be heterozygous so that those traits can wind up with those children. These children, we're not really sure, right? They could be this, right? Or they could be this, right? We're not really sure because they could have, depending on what they got from their parents, right? Now let's look over here, all right? So if this person is this, we already know that that person has to be that because anybody who doesn't have this dominant thing has to have both recessives. Well, this makes sense, right? That capital A came from dad, that capital A came from dad, and it could be this, right? Actually, it has to be, right? Because if the capital A came from dad, the lowercase a had to come from mom because that's all mom can give. So we know that this is correct here. Here it could be an either or, right? So what we know here, the answer here is autosomal dominant. All right, so that's the answer for number 2. All right, guys, here's number 3, right? So when I look at this here, right, I see this whole group of people that don't have this trait, whatever this trait may be. And we have a few people with this trait, right? But let's see how this works out, right? So the only way that you're gonna have children from the same parents, right, that are gonna, have this trait, not have this trait, right? The parents are gonna have to be heterozygous, right, to have kids that have this different trait, right? So I'm going to say that this trait is dominant, right? But each parent is heterozygous. Well, that makes sense, right? So we can say that this child could have gotten both capital A's, right? Could have also gotten the capital A, lowercase a, but we'll figure that out in a minute, right? This child could be this or could be that, right? We know that this child has to be recessive. That one has to be recessive. All of these have to be recessive for them to work, right? And for this to happen, this person also has to be recessive. And if we're basically saying that everybody who doesn't have this is recessive, we can fill all those in, right? Then we can look here, okay, well then that means that this person has to be heterozygous, right? Because it's the only way that could work. But this can also work, right? And that's what we're looking at, right? So this one again is going to be autosomal dominant. All right, next one. All right, guys, here's number 4. Number 4, the first thing that jumps out at me when I look at this is most people do not have this trait or this affliction or whatever it is, right? We only have 2 people on this whole pedigree that have it, and both of them are male. So my first thinking here is this is probably X-linked, right? X-linked and recessive. So I'm going to make this person X-linked, and I'm going to put the recessive on there. We know it's a boy, so it's XY, right? But I'm going to put the little recessive on the X, right? Meaning that they have this recessive trait, right? So then we know that this boy is just going to be X with I'm going to put the capital A there, Y, right? We're not going to worry about the daughters at all just yet, right? Let's look at just the afflicted people here. This is another boy, XY, but they would have to have this affliction, right? XY, right? The mother, right, would have to be, right, for this to work, right, she would have to be heterozygous for that trait, right? So let's see if this works out. I'm actually not sure if this works out. This person would get that from dad, that from mom, right? This person, well, we know that they're just given a Y to their boys because they're a male. We're going to say that they're not afflicted, right? Because they're not filled in. So this works out, right? Where the mother can give this recessive to the son and say that this father is afflicted as well, right? Now, if we look over here, right? Well, this boy got the Y from dad, got that from mom, right? So that actually works out, right? You can do that this way and say, oh, look, it's X-linked and it's recessive, right? Is that the only correct answer? I don't know. Let's take a look, right? That does work out, though, X-linked recessive. Let's take a look and see how this would work if we made it autosomal dominant. All right, let's take a look. Because sometimes these actually have multiple answers. Okay, so let's say that this is autosomal recessive, right? Okay, does this work out? Well, let's see. If mom is, even if mom is dominant, right? You could wind up with a daughter that has the dominant recessive. This guy would have to have the dominant recessive, right? Both of that would work for there, right? However, it would also work over here, right? So no matter how you look at it, right, this one actually could have two different answers. It could be sex-linked recessive, right? That worked, and it also worked making this just an autosomal recessive trait, right? So this one actually has two correct answers, right? All right, guys, here is the last one. Again, I'm going to take a look at this. I don't see a whole lot of people affected by this. So my thinking is I'm going to see, is this recessive? Does recessive work? Right? So if I make this recessive, that recessive, and that recessive, can I figure it all out? Right? Okay, so for this person to be recessive, that means that had to come from each one of those parents. However, they're not afflicted, so they have to be heterozygous. That works, right? It also works for the other children to not have it, right? This little a, or this little a came from mom, right? So that makes sense, right? So let's see, does it work over here, right? Okay, well, let's work back, right? Little a had to come from there and there, right? Okay, so dad definitely has to have the one big A. He could have both, right? Because mom is always going to be giving a recessive, right? But it doesn't matter, right? So mom gave the recessive, dad gave the dominant, right? So it makes sense that this is, again, autosomal recessive. I was just looking at some of the answers that some of you guys turned in, and I think a lot of people said that this was X-linked. So let's look at this as X-linked and see, can we make that work, right? So let's take a look at if that can work. Okay. All right, so if that is X-linked, right, then that would mean that this person has to have that, right? And this person has to be that. And this woman has to be that, right? We know that dad doesn't have it, right? So he's that, right? Okay, can we make this work? Well, for here, right, they had all daughters, so they're all going to get their dominant trait from dad, right? Which means that none of their daughters would have this affliction, right? But mom is always given that recessive, right? So they're all going to be this. So far it's working out, right? This guy, right, he is this, right? Or no, he's capital, right? He's that. So yeah, he gave his Y to his son. She gave the recessive to her son. Son has it, right? Does it work over here? Well, this guy, he has this, right? So it doesn't work over here, right? So mom could give the recessive, but then the other recessive would have had to come from dad. He doesn't have it, so sex linked does not work here, right? So this one has to be autosomal recessive. All right, so that's all of them. What I'd like you to do now is work on the rest of the problems on that worksheet that I gave you.